The events described in this video took place 6 years ago. On May 15, 2017, around 1 a.m., the Florida Coast Guard received a distress call. The report stated that a yacht traveling from the Cuban resort of Varadero to Florida collided with something and began to sink. There were originally 2 people aboard the vessel, and when rescuers found only one of them, many began to wonder, were things really as they seemed? Louis Bennett and Isabella Hellmann met online in 2015. Louis was born in 1977 in England. He moved to Australia with his family at a young age, and by 2017 he already had dual citizenship, British and Australian. Isabella Rodriguez was born in 1975 in Colombia. Her family moved to Florida in the 1990s, where they eventually obtained residency and then U.S. citizenship. In 2002, when she was 27 years old, Isabella married William Hellmann, but the couple divorced after 10 years together. In 2015, she met Louis Bennett online, and soon internet communication turned into a romantic relationship in real life. In July 2016, Louis and Isabella had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months after the baby was born, the couple purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. The following month, in February 2017, Isabella and Louis were married. Isabella worked as a real estate agent, and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30th, 2017, after leaving her 9-month-old daughter with her relatives, Isabella flew to St. Martin, a small Caribbean island where she met Louis. They planned something like a honeymoon, during which they were to return home to Florida on a sailing catamaran Louis had bought before he met Isabella. On April 30th, the couple left St. Martin. They were in the British Virgin Islands on May 1st and off the coast of Puerto Rico on May 2nd. The next point on their itinerary was Cuba, where they spent the most time and from where they intended to go home. On May 14th at about 5:30 p.m., the catamaran set sail from the Cuban resort of Varadero. 3 hours later, Isabella called her sister on her cell phone to say she would be home tomorrow, but by about 1 a.m., Louis had signaled a distress call. He contacted the U.S. Coast Guard and reported that the ship had begun to sink after a collision with an unknown object and that his wife was missing. Around 4 a.m., a Coast Guard helicopter crew located the Bennett life raft. A catamaran was also found at dawn, floating upside down but not yet sunk. Bennett was taken to Key West Island, which is the southernmost part of Florida. During his interview with investigators, Louis said that he and his wife took turns on duty, and that it was Isabella's turn at the time of the accident. He was asleep in his stateroom, but awoke to the fact that the ship seemed to have collided with something. Going up on deck and not seeing his wife there, he began calling out her name, but never got a response. According to him, the mast was loose and could have pushed Isabella overboard. He also said that the last time he saw his wife, she was wearing a life jacket. When Bennett was rescued by the Coast Guard, a rescue swimmer stated that his backpack was unusually heavy. While examining the items he had loaded on the life raft, the officers found 225 collectible coins, the provenance of which had yet to be determined. That same day, May 15th, Isabella Hellmann was reported missing. A search and rescue operation was conducted from the water and the air, but on May 18th, after 4 days of searching, with no sign of the missing woman, the Coast Guard officially announced the end of the rescue operation. Authorities suspected something was amiss when, less than 24 hours after the search for Isabella had ended, Louis Bennett requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead. His request was denied because it was not within the Coast Guard's jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. On May 24th, Bennett told a television station that he was leaving for Cuba, where he planned to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. 3 days later, on May 27th, he met Isabella's sister and told her he had just returned from Cuba. He said, "I met the authorities there and checked every hospital, but there is no sign of her. It is now 2 weeks since she has been missing, so I am not holding out much hope of seeing her, so I have to come to terms with that. This is absolutely devastating for me. She is my soulmate. I thought we were going to be together forever." The next day, on May 28th, Louis and the police came to the house where his wife's family lived to pick up their daughter, but Isabella's family did not want to give her up. With scandal and the help of the police, Bennett took his daughter after all. During the quarrel, Isabella's sister, Elizabeth, repeatedly claimed that Louis was to blame for Isabella's death.
You killed my sister! You killed my sister!
Bennett's quiet demeanor and his behavior after his wife's disappearance generally aroused the suspicion not only of Isabella's family, but also of the police. In interviewing family and friends of the missing woman, detectives repeatedly heard that quarrels between Isabella and Louis had become frequent after the birth of the child. The couple's neighbors also testified to this. Isabella shared with loved ones that Louis insisted on moving to Australia, while she did not want to leave the United States. On May 30th, Bennett gave an interview in which he denied all allegations of involvement in his wife's disappearance. According to him, he and Isabella had planned a beautiful life together, but now he was alone, and their daughter would grow up without a mother. In parallel with the investigation into Isabella Hellmann's disappearance, police began to determine the origin of the gold and silver coins found among Bennett's belongings. It was discovered that a year earlier, Bennett had served as first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a stash of 617 collectible silver and gold coins, worth about $100,000. One day, while the yacht was docked in the Caribbean with no one on board, someone broke in and stole all the coins. The person who committed the theft could not be found at the time, but now that the FBI has begun to trace the origin of the coins, the captain of the yacht has identified the coins found on Louis Bennett as being part of those stolen from him. With this information, the FBI obtained a search warrant for Bennett's apartment. Recall that when the man was rescued, 225 coins were found among his belongings. On June 16, 2017, a search of the apartment found another 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. By this time, Bennett had managed to leave U.S. territory and move his daughter to England where his parents lived. The financial situation of the man was not the best, and that apparently forced him to return to the United States because there remained an apartment which was valued at $125,000 and other personal items. He was also entitled to insurance payments in the U.S. for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Louis Bennett was arrested in Florida. He was charged with stealing coins and pleaded not guilty. A couple of days later, a federal judge set Bennett's bail at $250,000. He was unable to pay $250,000, so he remained in custody. While awaiting trial, Louis tried to have his wife declared dead. This would have allowed him to dispose of his and Isabella's property and funds in her bank accounts, but the judge twice refused to declare Isabella dead, as the investigation into her disappearance was still ongoing. In November 2017, Bennett pleaded guilty to both stealing the coins and knowingly transporting the coins into the United States. Bennett's parents wrote a letter to the judge in the case asking him for leniency in sentencing because his young daughter had already lost her mother. On February 20th, 2018, Bennett was sentenced to 7 months in prison, to be followed by another 3 years of probation. On the same day the sentence in the stolen coins case was announced, Bennett was charged with second-degree murder. Authorities said the man had intentionally caused the catamaran in which he and Isabella were traveling to crash. That was what the prosecutor was going to base the charge on, claiming that the staged wreck was orchestrated by Bennett to cover up evidence of the crime. Investigators argued that Bennett wanted to inherit his wife's fortune to pay off his own debts and then take their young daughter, Amelia, to live in Australia. A few months before her death, Isabella confessed through text messages that she was afraid of her husband. Her text messages revealed she felt Bennett did not respect her anymore and that she found an angry person when she came home. Isabella also said she was afraid to get home. Months before Ms. Hellmann's disappearance, she wrote, "If you don't like me or love me anymore, let us fix this ASAP because it's very pathetic the way you treated me all the time." Inspection of the catamaran before it sank showed that the portholes below the waterline were open, and the damage to the twin hulls appeared to have been caused from within. The waterline is the line of contact between the calm surface of the water and the hull of a floating vessel. By examining photos and video the U.S. Coast Guard took of the catamaran before it sank, an expert hired by the FBI to help in the high seas mystery determined Bennett's story couldn't be true. Based on the analysis, it does not appear the vessel sinking was caused by accidental damage. Rather, it appears the vessel was intentionally scuttled. An associate professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy stated in court records. Coast Guard officers who discovered the sinking catamaran did not find anything it could have collided with. Divers who were inspecting the vessel were hesitant to go inside, since it could have collapsed at any second. Eventually, it did. The catamaran sank at a depth of more than 4,000 feet, and no detailed inspection was made. 2 years after the disappearance of Isabella Hellmann, she was declared dead. The judge made official what most believe happened almost from the minute Isabella Hellmann was reported overboard at sea. In a series of orders, Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer wrote that Hellmann is presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. To date, Ms. Hellmann has not been found and has not contacted any of her family. Based on all evidence, Ms. Hellmann is dead, the statement said. In January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Bennett's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella Hellmann's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, a plea deal resulted in Bennett being charged with manslaughter, and the second-degree murder charge was dropped. While he could have faced a life sentence for second-degree murder, the deal now gave him a maximum sentence of 8 years in prison. Isabella's family called the deal bizarre, but at the same time acknowledged that authorities had consulted with them when determining it. A document signed by Bennett and filed by the prosecutor with the court said he did not remember whether he was looking for or calling for his wife when he discovered she was missing. He did not fire flares or search for his wife on the catamaran or in water. Bennett did not immediately ask for help. Instead, he loaded everything he needed into a life raft, then attempted to stage a collision that caused the catamaran to flood and left the vessel on the raft himself. The prosecutor's office stated that he called for help 45 minutes after he stopped and realized that his wife was nowhere to be found. It is also worth noting that the U.S. Attorney's Office said in a statement that Bennett had experienced sailing in open water for extended periods of time, including being trained in emergency situations, and had previously traveled from St. Martin to Australia. He knew the emergency procedures, but for some reason, he did not use his knowledge. He did not require Isabella to wear a life jacket, harness, or personal locator, the prosecutor said in a statement. In essence, Bennett admitted to his negligence, namely handing over control of the catamaran to his wife, who lacked the necessary experience, which ultimately caused her to fall overboard and drown. Bennett is an experienced sailor who received a certification from the Royal Yachting Association in the United Kingdom as a coastal skipper. This training included instruction on emergency procedures such as man-overboard protocols and night sailing safety, the DOJ said in a statement. In contrast to Bennett, his wife had not been trained in emergency sailing procedures, did not have a sailing certification, and had substantially less sailing experience. Only Bennett knows what really happened that night aboard the catamaran, and he is unlikely ever to reveal it. After the guilty plea, Isabella Hellmann's family, through her lawyer, issued a desperate statement asking Bennett to show remorse. Specifically, this statement read, "The pain he has caused them is unbearable and never goes away. There is nothing that Lewis can do to ease the pain he has caused them by taking Isabella from them. There is, however, additional pain that he has caused and continues to cause by depriving them contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. As much as she was anyone's, she was theirs, and they love her and miss her. The only contact they have had with Amelia was 3 FaceTime chats. But they have not seen her or hugged her in too long. They want to hold her, to love her and to be with her. She is, after all, as much a part of their family as his. The statement said they wanted Bennett to do the right thing. On May 28, 2019, Louis Bennett, 42, who pleaded guilty to manslaughter for the death of his wife, Isabella Hellmann, was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Bennett apologized to Isabella's family during the hearing. "I would like to express my deep and heartfelt apologies to Isabella's family. I know that they have been through unimaginable pain as a result of my actions, and for that I am truly sorry. I have made poor decisions which compounded a tragedy of such magnitude that I pray no one else would ever have to experience it," Bennett said in federal court in Miami. Under the plea bargain, he waived his right to appeal. Before the judge announced his decision, Bennett asked to be allowed to get out of prison early so that he could continue to raise his daughter. "If you may permit me to be with my daughter as soon as possible," Bennett said. "I want to bring her up in a manner that is respectful to my wife's wishes." But Judge Moreno sided with prosecutors and chose 8 years in prison as the sentence and 3 years on supervised release. Members of Isabella Hellmann's family said after the verdict was announced that they planned to visit Amelia, who lives with Bennett's parents in England. "I think at this point, all we can do is hope that the visits will go forward. There will be a continuation of those so that Amelia grows up knowing she has 2 families that love her," said Mitchell Kitroser, the attorney representing Hellmann's family. "She's lost her mom, but that doesn't mean she's lost her mom's family. I think the ideal scenario would be to have both families participate in her life as she grows up, so that she has as many people in her life to support her as possible." The events described in this video took place in 2008 in Auburn, Alabama, USA. Although 15 years have passed since then, the final word in the Lauren Burke case has yet to be spoken. Lauren Ashley Burke was born December 30, 1989 in Marietta, Georgia. Her parents, James Burke and Viviane Gershon, later divorced. Lauren had a sister, Jacqueline Burke, and a brother, Chad Burke. After high school, Lauren went to Auburn University where she studied graphic design, was an active member of Delta Gamma sorority, played lacrosse, and was generally active in the campus community. Lauren was described by her friends as a well-liked, excellent student, always smiling, happy, and helpful. While still a high school student, Lauren started dating a guy named Sean McQuaid. After high school, they both enrolled at Auburn University, where they continued their relationship. At this point in life, getting an education was a priority for both young people, but that didn't stop them from making plans for their future together. Unfortunately, however, not all of Lauren's plans and dreams were destined to come true. She started the morning of March 4, 2008, by having breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend Sean. At 11 o'clock, Lauren went to class, after which she called her father James to discuss plans for the spring break and a visit to the dentist. After finishing her conversation with her father, she went to Sean's dorm, where she stayed until the evening. At 8:30 p.m., she had an appointment with her classmate Michael. They were to meet in the library and prepare a study assignment together. When Lauren, around 8 p.m., left Sean's room, it was already dark outside. Her car, a black 2001 Honda Civic, was parked in the parking lot next to the dorm, and she moved towards it. That was the last time Sean saw Lauren. Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, started calling her cell phone after she didn't show up for her appointment, but Lauren didn't answer for some reason. He kept calling over and over, and finally he heard Lauren's voice on the other end. She said she wasn't coming to the library because she'd forgotten all about the appointment, and then she hung up. A little later, at about 9 p.m., 911 received a call about an injured girl who had been seen lying on the road between the Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. It was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars in the roadway, blocking traffic in both directions. Lauren was lying on her back in the middle of the road, taking slow, deep breaths. She was suffocating. There were many wounds on her body and only socks on her feet. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived on the scene, at which point Lauren was already unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived, and as they loaded Lauren into the ambulance, her pulse was barely palpable. At 9:35 p.m., Lauren was taken to East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors began trying to save her life. 8 minutes earlier, at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers received multiple reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus. Firefighters and police were immediately sent to the address the callers gave. Unable to find the owner of the burning car among the crowd of curious students attracted by the fire from their dormitories, police checked the license plates and discovered that the owner of the car was someone named James Burke, a resident of Georgia. James Burke is Lauren's father. The police contacted James by phone and learned that the actual owner of the fire-ravaged Honda was his daughter, Lauren, who attends Auburn University. James immediately asked what was wrong with his daughter, but the police officers had nothing to say. They didn't know where Lauren was and told James that no one was in the burning car. After James talked to the police officer, he immediately started calling his daughter's cell phone, but she didn't answer, which only added to his anxiety. Unable to reach Lauren, James first called friends of his daughter that he knew, but none of them knew anything about her whereabouts or the car fire. He then called his ex-wife and Lauren's mother, Vivian Gershon, hoping that maybe she knew where their daughter might be. Lauren's mother didn't know anything about what had happened either. At 9:40 p.m., Vivian called her daughter's boyfriend, Sean. That's how Sean found out that Lauren was missing and that her car had been burned. Sean, calling mutual acquaintances of Lauren and trying to find out if anyone had seen her that evening, learned that she had canceled a meeting at the library saying she had forgotten about it. However, Sean knew for a fact that Lauren hadn't forgotten about her appointment for the evening, as when she left his room about 2 hours ago, she had planned to go straight to the library. While family and friends tried to figure out where Lauren had gone, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were battling to keep her alive. Since Lauren was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or documents, the doctors did not know her name. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, doctors were unable to save Lauren's life. She was pronounced dead about an hour after being admitted to the medical facility. The cause of her passing was a single bullet wound. The bullet, which had traveled out, had punctured both of Lauren's lungs. Experts concluded that the muzzle of the gun was only a few inches from Lauren's skin at the time of the shot. Police officers, comparing the girl's passing at the hospital and the burned-out car on campus, whose owner was missing, quickly realized that the victim, who could not be saved by doctors, was Lauren Burke. The very next day, March 5, 2008, James Burke identified the body of his daughter after visiting from Atlanta. News of Lauren's passing quickly spread around campus. Auburn University released a statement about Lauren Burke's passing, urging students and staff to be extra cautious on and off campus, but assuring them that the campus is safe. Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety, the statement said. The Delta Gamma Society released a statement about what fraternity representatives called an unexpected and disturbing crime. The society urged sisters of the Auburn branch to cooperate fully with detectives while they sort out what happened. While Lauren's family and friends were grieving, police were trying to figure out who took her life, how the car fire was connected to it, and whether other students should be wary. Both the spot along the road where Lauren Burke was found and the area around her car were processed for evidence. We have put every resource we can into finding the person responsible for this crime, said Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Stouffer. Auburn, Alabama is a relatively quiet student community, and we take these things to heart. If someone gets hurt or dies, we all feel it, and we won't rest until we find the perpetrator. Stouffer also said that Alabama Governor Bob Riley offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in Burke's case. Lauren's charred car was taken to the Auburn Police Department. Investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's office sifted through the remains of the car's burned interior. They found scraps of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, which could mean the interior of the car was the scene of the crime, and the perpetrator had set it on fire to destroy the evidence. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend. None of them could name a single person who wanted to harm Lauren and was capable of doing so. Knowing that before her passing, Lauren was in a dorm at Sean's, the investigators searched his room, but nothing was found to link Sean to the crime. After speaking with Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet in the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his phone, he heard a noise similar to that of a moving car. At the same time, it emerged that someone had used Lauren's bank card several times, shortly after she was found lying in the road. In all likelihood, the person who had Lauren's bank card was involved in her incident, and the police began looking for him. However, events soon took an unexpected turn. Less than 3 days after Lauren's passing, at 9:55 a.m. on March 7, 2008, in the parking lot of the Walmart supermarket in Noonan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn, a man of African descent attacked a 72-year-old woman as she was getting into her car. The attacker hit her on the head, threatened her, and told her to get in the passenger seat. He himself got into the driver's seat and tried to drive away from the parking lot, but noticed that an eyewitness to the attack was following him, talking to someone on the phone. The thought of the bystander calling the police prompted the perpetrator to return to the Walmart parking lot. He stopped and got out of the stolen vehicle, ran over to a nearby silver Chrysler Sebring, got in, and fled the scene in a hurry. A few hours later, 4 officers chased the fleeing Chrysler at high speed toward Columbus, West Georgia. The driver did not respond in any way to stop, endangering other road users. During the chase, police observed the driver of the Chrysler throwing an object out the window. One of the chase crews stopped and searched for the object. Police officers found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the chase continued, but at one point, the perpetrator's vehicle broke down and smoke billowed from under the hood. The driver stopped abruptly in the roadway and opened the door. Next, a police officer, who was in pursuit on a motorcycle, crashed into the open door. After the collision, the officer flew over the handlebars of the motorcycle and fell to the pavement, only fortunately not seriously injured. The road where the perpetrator stopped was through a forest, and it was into the woods that he rushed to flee. He could not escape, however. The police quickly caught up with him and snapped handcuffs on his wrists. Courtney Lerol Lockhart was born on October 20th, 1984. In the words of his family, he was a nice, fun-loving guy until he joined the U.S. Army. He was sent to Iraq in 2004, from which he returned as someone else in 2005, according to his mother. "He wasn't the Courtney I knew," his mother said. Courtney was a cheerful guy, but after he returned from Iraq, he never smiled again, never let anyone stand behind him, and sometimes hid in the closet or under the bed. In 2006, Lockhart and his girlfriend, with whom he had by this time broken up, had a daughter. Also in 2006, he was court-martialed for assaulting other soldiers, using illegal substances, and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention before being dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As 2008 approached, Lockhart was said to have gone increasingly off the rails. He barely showered, stopped visiting his daughter, and was heavily addicted to illegal substances. Beginning in February 2008, he committed a string of burglaries, and with the exception of a convenience store robbery, his methods were always the same. He would approach the victim from behind as she was getting into her car in the parking lot, threaten her with a gun, demand that she give him her purse, and attempt to take possession of the car. One such crime ended taking the life of Lauren Burke. Lockhart's string of assaults stopped on March 7, 2008, after he attacked a 72-year-old woman and failed to evade a police chase. After his arrest, Courtney Lockhart, 23, was taken to the police station, where he confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Lauren Burke's life. The interrogation was videotaped and became a key piece of evidence at trial. Plus, Lauren's personal belongings such as her iPod and bank cards were found in his car. He gave a detailed account of the events of the day he kidnapped Lauren. It was Tuesday, March 4th, 2008. Lockhart woke up in his silver Chrysler Sebring. He had spent the previous night in his car, not far from East Alabama Medical Center. He needed money, so he started driving around Auburn looking for another victim. It's worth noting that all the people he attacked were women, none of them men. His drive ended on the campus of Auburn University, where he parked next to the student dorms. He spent several hours sitting in his car watching the students. Around 8 p.m., he noticed some girl walk up to the car parked next to him and leisurely open the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking long, Lockhart grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind. Poking her with the muzzle of his gun, he asked her how much money she had on her. When he didn't get an answer, he pushed Lauren into the car, into the front passenger seat, and got behind the wheel. According to Lockhart, Lauren said nothing but screamed in fear. When she finally calmed down, she pulled $200 from her purse, handed it to him, and begged him to leave. Instead of leaving, however, he ordered Lauren to take off her clothes. At gunpoint, and hearing threats against her, Lauren complied, stripping off everything but a pair of socks. According to Lockhart, there was only one reason he made Lauren undress. He thought that if she had no clothes on, she would not want to escape. Lockhart then began to drive around the streets of Auburn. All the while he was driving with one hand on the wheel and with the other holding Lauren at gunpoint. She tried to dissuade him from committing the crime, and when he said his life was over, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At some point her phone started ringing. Lockhart told her to answer it and make something up so no one would suspect anything. It was a call from Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library. When she answered, she said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up right away. Lockhart said that they continued to drive through the streets of the city, and Lauren wouldn't give up trying to talk him into letting her go. She said she would help him overcome the difficulties he was facing. As they were driving down Highway 147, Lauren opened the door to jump out of the moving car, and at that point Lockhart said he accidentally fired a shot. As we now know, the fired bullet pierced both of Lauren's lungs, plus she sustained injuries from the fall. She managed to wave to passing drivers before her strength failed her, and she lost consciousness. Lockhart told investigators that he parked outside the church and watched as cars began to stop next to Lauren lying on the pavement. Realizing that the police would be arriving any minute, he hurriedly fled. Planning to destroy the evidence he had left in the car, he drove to a gas station and bought a can of gasoline, which he paid for with Lauren's bank card. He doused the interior of the car with the gasoline he bought, then got in and drove to the campus where he abducted Lauren because his Chrysler was parked there. According to Lockhart, as he drove, he became dizzy from the gasoline fumes, so he rolled down the windows to let air in from the street. You might be wondering why he didn't drive to the campus first and doused Lauren's car with gasoline there. Why did he drive on a powder keg, since a short circuit or spark could have caused the car to burn up with him? Perhaps it had something to do with Lockhart's mental problems or low IQ, but we shall talk about that a little later. Upon arriving on campus, Courtney took $46, an iPod, and her bank cards from Lauren's car before setting the car on fire and driving off in his Chrysler. He drove to a gas station where he paid for the gas with Lauren's money. He then returned to campus again to see if the car had burned all the way down. Investigators began to question whether all of Lockhart's testimony was true. They speculated that Lockhart had forced Lauren to undress, not so that she would not run away as he claimed, but for an entirely different purpose. But he could not get what he wanted because Lauren suddenly jumped out of the moving car. Also, the investigators doubted that Lockhart shot Lauren by accident. It seemed unlikely given the fact that Courtney had served in the army and knew well how to handle a gun. It seemed more logical that Lauren realized that Lockhart wasn't going to let her go and decided that her only chance of escape was to jump. She opened the door, and as she jumped out of the car, and Lockhart shot her. Ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun Lockhart had thrown out the window as he tried to evade a police chase. In addition, experts ran tests and ruled out the possibility of an accidental discharge. The trigger had to be pulled hard enough to make the shot. Lauren's family and friends bid her farewell on March 9th, the same day investigators interrogated Lockhart for the second time. The next day, he was formally charged multiple times in the Lauren Burke case. The trial began on November 8, 2010. Lockhart's attorneys claimed that their client had a mental illness because of his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was accidental. According to court documents, Lockhart pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. The court was presented with the testimony of a psychologist who testified that Lockhart had an IQ of 86, which is below average, that he had some symptoms from being in combat in the military, but he did not have PTSD, and that Lockhart was immature and not thinking straight. Although the state attempted to introduce evidence of Lockhart's other crimes and his dishonorable conduct in the military, the trial judge excluded that evidence. After the guilt phase of trial, the sentencing phase immediately followed. Lockhart presented witness testimony and evidence in an attempt to cast himself as a war hero who was mentally disturbed by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury rendered a special verdict in which an additional aggravating factor was the taking of a person's life in the course of the kidnapping. The jury voted 12-0 to recommend a sentence of life without parole. The trial judge later disagreed with the jury's advisory sentence and sentenced Lockhart to death. In a 28-page sentencing order, the judge explained why he disagreed with the jury's opinion. He concluded that the kidnapping weighed heavily in favor of the death penalty. The victim was alone, unarmed, and she was chosen by Lockhart at random. The kidnapping is even more egregious because she was taken from a college campus, a place where students should feel safe, and forced into her own car. Lockhart forced her to undress and held her at gunpoint in order to prevent her escape. The court also emphasized that the jury was unaware of Lockhart's crime spree and the true nature of Lockhart's military service. Although the jury heard testimony regarding Lockhart's service, the jury was unaware of the full extent of Lockhart's military disciplinary record, wrote the judge. The court reasoned that, had the jury been aware of the additional facts known to the court, their sentencing recommendation would likely have differed. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Lockhart is still on death row in Alabama and has not given up trying to appeal his sentence. After his conviction and death sentence, he appealed to an Alabama court, which upheld the sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals denied Lockhart's request for a retrial. He then appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama, but in September 2014, his motion was again denied. In January 2015, Lockhart appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. In April of that year, the Supreme Court of the United States denied his petition. In 2018, Lockhart made another attempt to challenge the sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization who represented him tried to convince the court that the lawyers defending Lockhart in 2010 had mishandled the case. Although there were some flaws in Lockhart's 2010 defense, it ultimately did not change the outcome, with the death sentence being upheld again. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Lockhart's death sentence. Lauren's parents said they would never give up and would do everything in their power to keep Lockhart's death sentence from being overturned. Courtney Lockhart gave my daughter the death penalty. There's no reason why he shouldn't have the death penalty. That's all I have to say, Burke's father Jim said. He didn't give her a second chance. He shouldn't get a second chance either, Lauren's mother Vivian said. As of today, Courtney Lockhart remains on death row in Alabama. Today's story took place in 2018 in the Netherlands. Doni Odegaard, a resident of the U.S. state of Minnesota, was greatly alarmed when she saw a police officer at her doorstep. A terrible sense of déjà vu overcame her at that moment and mentally transported her back 3 years. She immediately realized the policeman's visit was connected to her 21-year-old daughter, Sarah. Sarah Pappenheim was born January 30, 1997, in Minnesota. She was the second child of her parents, Donnie Odegaard and Jerry Pappenheim. The oldest child in their family was Josh. He and Sarah were very friendly, and the close bond between them became stronger as they grew older. When Sarah was in second grade, her family moved from Minneapolis to Redding, California. She graduated from Foothill High School in 2015, where, in addition to her studies, she was a member of the school band in which she played the drums. Music in general, and drums in particular, were Sarah's personal passion. She was an accomplished drummer and often played in weekly jam sessions at Redding's venues. Not only did Sarah stand out for her drumming skills, but she was one of the few female drummers appearing on stage. At the age of 18, Sarah returned to her native Minnesota with her mother and brother. By this time, her parents were divorced. She went on to play drums at various venues in Minnesota, and one day music brought her together with famous blues guitarist and singer Bernard Allison. He was impressed with Sarah's performance, and she began to occasionally take part in his concerts. By the age of 19, the girl had become a local celebrity among blues fans, and because of her stunning, wide smile, Sarah was nicknamed Ronald McDonald. The divorce of his parents hurt Josh greatly. He had been struggling with depression and mental health problems for the past few years. No one close to the guy at the time could have imagined how it would all end. It was February 2016, on a seemingly unremarkable day. Donnie heard a knock on the door, and when she opened it, she saw police officers on the doorstep asking who she was to Josh Pappenheim. The woman replied that she was his mother, whereupon the officers sadly told her the news that divided her life into before and after. At the age of 20, Josh took his own life. His passing was a heavy blow to his loved ones. As Donnie would later recall, she cried so much that her tear ducts dried up. Her message under Josh's obituary still survives, in which she promises to love her son forever. Sarah and Josh were very close. She was devastated by his departure, and also the fact that her brother had voluntarily passed away. Rather than let the pain consume her, Sarah decided to study psychology to help people with mental health problems in the future. She had long been in contact with a guy named Nico Karsemajer. The guy lived in the Netherlands, and Sarah decided to go there. She enrolled at Erasmus University in Rotterdam, where she began to study psychology. Nico helped Sarah go through the loss of her brother, helped her with her studies, and generally, as a native speaker, helped her in any way he could. Although Sarah immersed herself in her studies and work, her love of music never disappeared. She wrote to Bernard Allison, with whom she had once performed on the same stage and whom she maintained a friendship with, that she had almost saved up the money to buy the drum kit she had dreamed of for so long. In January 2017, Bernard Allison, along with his band, toured Europe. On January 30th, her 20th birthday, Sarah came with Nico to Allison's performance in Germany, and as soon as Bernard spotted her, he immediately called her to the stage. After wishing her a happy birthday, he invited Sarah to sit at the drum kit and take part in a performance, just like in the good old days. This recording was made on that very day.
I know I'm black and she's white, but we come from the same background.
In Rotterdam, Sarah lived on the third floor in a complex just a mile from the university. 2018 was coming to an end, and she wanted to spend Christmas at home in the United States. Her flight was supposed to take place about a week before New Year's Eve. However, on December 12th, everything changed. Donnie Odegaard saw a police officer on her doorstep, just as she did in 2016 when her son passed away. When the officer began asking her about her daughter, the woman's legs began to shake. She knew in her heart what she was being told, and at the same time, she couldn't believe it had happened to her again. When the officer was convinced that Sarah Poppenheim's mother was before him, he sadly informed her that her daughter had passed away. After these words, Doni lost consciousness. She had 2 children. Her son was gone when he was 20 years old, and now she had lost her daughter as well. Sarah was 21 years old. As previously stated, the girl lived in a complex on the 3rd floor, with the vast majority of the people living there being students. For the past year, Sarah had rented an apartment there, and she shared it with another student, also a musician who played the double bass. Like Sarah, Joel Schelling was a talented musician, and music was their meeting point. Sarah was a very outgoing, always smiling person, which could not be said of her roommate. Joel's only friend was Sarah, and even though he had a temper and occasionally quarreled with her, Sarah didn't want to leave him alone with his problems and moved to another apartment because she remembered what had happened to her brother. She told her mother that she could always calm Joel down when he got mad at someone. However, as time passed, the situation began to deteriorate. 6 days before she passed away, Sarah wrote to her friend Adam Pryor in Wisconsin that she was afraid of her roommate because he had told her he was going to physically eliminate 3 people whom he didn't like. "I have to go to the police," Sarah wrote. A couple of days before her passing, Sarah had spoken to her mother on the phone and also told her that her roommate's behavior was bothering her more and more. Doni told her daughter to look for another place to live immediately, and until she moved out, to try to stay as far away from Joel as possible. On Wednesday, December 12, 2018, at 12:20 p.m., Sarah and Joel's next-door neighbors called the police after hearing them fighting loudly, and then Sarah screaming in horror. When the police arrived and entered the apartment, they found Sarah lying unconscious on the floor, with multiple stab wounds all over her body. Attempts to resuscitate her were unfortunately unsuccessful, and she passed away. Her roommate was not there. Apparently, he had run away, and the police started looking for him. Interviewing neighbors on the same floor, officers learned that Joel Schelling had left the apartment in a hurry, taking a double bass with him. This musical instrument is of an imposing size, and so it became a special feature in the description sent out. Less than 2 hours after the crime was committed, 23-year-old Joel Schelling was arrested at Eindhoven train station, about 60 miles from Rotterdam. His parents lived in Eindhoven, and he was on his way to visit them. He called his mother while on the train and confessed to her that he had taken Sarah's life. The judge placed him under arrest for 14 days. During that time, it was to be determined whether Schelling suffered from mental disorders. The forensic experts who conducted the autopsy counted 27 stab wounds on Sarah's body, several of which were in the neck, abdomen, and back. 2 days after her daughter passed away, Doni Odegaard traveled to the Netherlands. She had to decide on the return of Sarah's body to her home country. $40,000 had to be raised, and the family was helped in this endeavor by people who cared for them. The first thing Doni tried to find out was whether Sarah had gone to the police to report that her roommate was going to attack 3 people. As it turned out, Sarah had not contacted law enforcement. However, she did contact social workers who help people with psychological difficulties. The social workers paid Schelling a visit, and they got the impression that he was normal as he answered all the questions and was calm and straightforward. On the following day, Sarah was again forced to contact social services. The reason for this was that Schelling, in a fit of anger, began to beat himself with a hammer and said that he would soon have to do away with several people. Sarah was afraid that Joel would find out that she was the one who had sent the social workers to ask him. The specialists did not have time to respond to Sarah's second request, as she had already passed away. Schelling was accused of causing Sarah Poppenheim's passing. He admitted his guilt, but said he did not remember taking her life. According to him, he remembered how they began to fight, and then when he came to, he was already in the shower cleaning himself. The hearing in the case began in March 2019. Sarah's mother, Doni Odegaard, flew to each hearing, where she could only understand what the participants were saying with the help of an interpreter. At the trial, Schelling stated that he suffered from delirium and heard voices in his head. When the judge asked him if the voices had ordered him to fight with Sarah, he replied that he did not know and could not remember. He also said he did not remember what he and Sarah began fighting about. Before the verdict was announced in December 2019, experts said Schelling suffered from various disorders and needed long-term treatment, and at the same time they concluded that he should be held responsible for taking Sarah Pappenheim's life. The medics reasoned that Schelling remembered the beginning of the fight and scuffle with Sarah and could have made a choice to stop or to grab the knife. He chose the latter and should be punished. The prosecutor demanded 10 years in prison for the defendant, but the judge in Rotterdam sentenced Schelling to 6 years in prison, followed by indefinite imprisonment in a psychiatric hospital. The court went on to explain that it rejected the prosecution's argument for 10 years in prison because of the suspect's relatively young age and his extreme diminished capacity when he took the victim's life. The suspect can therefore not be fully blamed for the proven fact. Upon sentencing, the court released a detailed statement explaining that, considering the severity and unpredictability of the crime, as well as the serious psychological disorders of the suspect, the court deems recidivism of a violent crime very likely. The suspect suffers from chronic disorders that require prolonged treatment and guidance in a clinical setting. It characterized the psychiatric detention as a punitive measure for Schelling, who has said he's willing to participate in treatment for depression and other disorders. He will remain held under treatment until the court, which will review his status every 2 years, determines he is well enough to be released. The court also ordered Schelling to pay €68,700 in compensation to Sarah's family. Doni Odegaard was furious at the sentence, saying, "This is not justice." She was expecting a minimum of 10 years. In America, the woman said, Schelling would have faced life imprisonment or capital punishment so that he would never have the opportunity to do something like this again. She also expressed concern that after just 4 years, Schelling could be released from prison on parole, promising to do everything in her power to keep him behind bars as long as possible. There was also an investigation into the social workers Sarah had called in. It was concluded that they could not be blamed because they were not competent enough to determine the disorders that Schelling was diagnosed with. This video is about what happened in 2016 in Massachusetts. On Sunday, August 7, 2016, 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte was visiting her mother, Rosanna, in the small town of Princeton, Massachusetts. On that sunny and warm day, she decided to go for a run, as she was usually very active, often taking walks outdoors and practicing yoga. In a few hours, she was supposed to take a bus to New York City, where she worked and lived. After going for a run, Vanessa did not return home. Her mother, Rosanna, was very concerned about her daughter's long absence, as this behavior was unusual for Vanessa, so Rosanna went to the police for help. This case attracted a lot of national media attention, as this kind of incident had not happened in the small town of Princeton for the past 30 years. In addition, just a few days before, another runner and fitness blogger, Karina Vetrano, 30 years old, was involved in a similar incident in a New York City neighborhood. Vanessa Teresa Marcotte was born on June 17, 1989, in Leominster, Massachusetts. She excelled in school and graduated summa cum laude from Boston University in 2011 with a bachelor's degree in communications. After graduation, she worked at an online marketing software startup in Boston called WordStream. Later, she became an account manager in Google's New York City office. About once every 2 months, Vanessa had the opportunity to visit her mother and aunt who lived in another state, in the small rural town of Princeton, with a population of about 4,000. She was an only child in the family, so her mother Rosanna looked forward to every meeting and was happy when her daughter found an opportunity to visit her. On Sunday, August 7, 2016, at about 1 p.m., Vanessa left her mother's house on Brook Station Road to go for a run and then take the commuter bus back to New York later that day. The area she was going to run in was familiar to her. After several hours passed and Vanessa did not return, her mother contacted the police. Officers immediately began a search and searched the area that Vanessa's route approximately followed first. At 8:20 p.m., a police dog picked up the trail and led the search team to an area of dense vegetation, about 60 yards from the road and less than a mile from Rosanna Marcotte's home. The body of a woman was discovered and quickly identified. The victim turned out to be Vanessa Marcotte. A preliminary examination of the body left detectives in no doubt that Vanessa's death was criminal in nature. Her body was stripped of her clothes and there were some burn marks on her legs, hands, and face. As evident, the place where the body was found is quite secluded. There are no houses, just the road and the woods on either side of it. Vanessa's cell phone and headphones were also missing. Police thoroughly searched the entire surrounding area but could not find any of these items. Investigators believed the perpetrator had deliberately taken them because they might have left traces of his DNA on them. A sneaker with traces of fire was lying on the grass next to the body. Traces of fire were also found in other locations. Detectives concluded that the perpetrator used gasoline to try to destroy traces of his DNA. Forensic experts determined that the cause of Vanessa's death was strangulation. She fought for her life, and as a result, DNA from an unknown person was found under her fingernails. The fact that Vanessa's clothes had been taken off made the motive of the crime clear. To be brief, the medical examiners found evidence of male contact. The DNA samples were tested, but no matches were found in either the local or national databases. For the small town of Princeton, with a population of less than 4,000 people, this type of crime was completely uncommon, and therefore shocked the entire local population. Authorities asked residents of Princeton and all surrounding areas to be vigilant and cautious, and asked anyone who saw anything suspicious to report it to the Massachusetts State Hotline or the Princeton Police Department. Worcester District Attorney Joseph Early Jr. confirmed at a press conference on August 11th that the perpetrator was probably male and had received minor cuts, bruises, and scratches during the struggle with Vanessa before her death. What happened to Vanessa came as a shock not only to her family and Princeton residents, but also to her co-workers. A Google representative said, "Vanessa Marcotte was a much-loved member of the Google team, working in our New York office for the last year and a half and known for her ubiquitous smile, passion for volunteer work, and love of Boston sports. We are deeply shocked and saddened, and our thoughts are with her family and friends. Her alma mater paid tribute to her as well. We're so terribly sad for her family and friends," said Colin Riley, the executive director of media relations at Boston University. "They're in our thoughts and prayers." Police initially considered a possible connection between Vanessa Marcotte's death and an incident a few days earlier in New York City involving another runner, Karina Vetrano. On August 2, 2016, in the late afternoon, Vetrano went for a run in Spring Creek Park in Queens, less than a block from her home. She ran alone despite her father's concerns. She was last seen alive after 5 p.m., just before she entered the park. After she failed to respond to repeated calls and text messages, Vetrano's father notified a neighbor, the police chief of the New York City Police Department, who began a search. Around 11 p.m., her father found her body face down about 15 feet from the trail. As in the case of Vanessa Marcotte, Karina Vetrano's body was exposed, and the cause of her death was also strangulation. Despite the similarities between the two cases, investigators did not think there was a connection between them. 6 months later, 20-year-old Brooklyn resident Chanel Lewis was arrested by police after his DNA was matched to the one found on Karina Vetrano's body. On April 23, 2019, Lewis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But who was responsible for Vanessa Marcotte's death? According to investigators, the person who took Vanessa's life either lived in or frequented Princeton, and most likely knew the area well. Detectives also believe that Vanessa Marcotte did not know the perpetrator and that their paths crossed accidentally. In the meantime, law enforcement once again sought help from the public, for whom separate 24-hour phone lines had been set up. Eventually, an eyewitness reported seeing Vanessa stop outside a local convenience store for a drink of water after 1 p.m. on August 7th and was last seen walking and talking on her cell phone. Investigators believe the attack on Vanessa occurred within the next 2 hours from the time she was seen outside the store. Her phone was turned off at 2:11 p.m. and has not been turned on since. Police officers were receiving and checking many clues, searching the area where the body was found several times as well as the surrounding area, but it was not yielding the desired results. It was not until 3 months later that the police had more information about the case. A new witness said that on August 7th, he had twice seen a dark-colored Ford SUV parked on the curb near where Vanessa's body had been found, with the hood up. Outside, it was the driver, a man between the ages of 25 and 35, and who looked Hispanic. The first time the witness drove by the SUV was about 12:45 p.m. At that time, the driver was standing next to his vehicle and talking on the phone, and the second time the witness drove past the same location at approximately 2:05 p.m. The SUV was standing in the same spot, but its hood was down and no one was visible inside or near the vehicle. Authorities began searching for a Hispanic man who owned a black SUV and allegedly lived somewhere near Princeton. On February 23, 2017, more than 6 months after Vanessa's death, Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early Jr. released additional details of the investigation, stating that the DNA found on Vanessa's body had been sent to a lab and a profile had been created. Based on the DNA evidence and witness testimony, the suspect was believed to be a Hispanic male, between the ages of 20 and 30, of athletic build, medium height, and with short or shaved hair. It was also believed that the suspect either owned or had access to a dark-colored SUV on the day of the crime and must have had visible upper body injuries within days of the attack. About 3 weeks later, a police officer patrolling the streets of Worcester County saw a man who matched the description of the suspect. This man was driving a vehicle identical to the one seen the day Vanessa Marcotti died. The police officer quickly wrote down the license plate number on his hand. After finding out the identity of the owner of the car, the police team went to the house where he lived. That man was the 31-year-old Angelo Colon Ortiz. Colon Ortiz, a Puerto Rican native who had no criminal history, was married with 3 children and had lived in Worcester for less than a year. He worked for a third-party contractor of FedEx, made deliveries in, and was familiar with the town of Princeton and surrounding areas. According to his Worcester neighbors, Colon Ortiz was described as perverted and often made vulgar comments to people in the neighborhood. A former female Princeton postal worker also said that Colon Ortiz often made crude comments in Spanish about her and other women to his coworker. When the police asked Angelo about Vanessa Marcotte, he stated that he did not know her. Furthermore, he could not recall if he was in Princeton on the day of the attack on Vanessa. He was asked to provide a sample of his DNA, and he agreed, signing documents indicating that he agreed to provide his DNA for analysis. It took some time for the lab to run the test, which showed that Colon Ortiz's DNA matched the one found under Vanessa Marcotti's fingernails. On April 15, 2017, the man was arrested and charged 3 days later. Prosecutors alleged that on the day of the crime, Colon Ortiz bought $5 worth of gasoline from a store 6 miles from the scene, and that the purchase itself was made at 2:35 p.m. This meant that by that time, Vanessa was already dead, and the man returned to the scene to try to destroy the evidence, namely his DNA on Vanessa's body. The district attorney argued that the DNA evidence was obtained through all the proper procedures that helped bring the charges. However, Colon Ortiz's attorneys claimed that their client's DNA sample was taken in an irregular manner. They cited that the language barrier prevented their client from fully understanding that he was not required to provide the police with a sample of his DNA, and Colon Ortiz stated that he did not know that he could have refused to provide one. In an affidavit in support of the motion to suppress, Colon Ortiz wrote that while he is a United States citizen, he was born in Puerto Rico and he does not speak, read, or understand English. Ortiz wrote that on March 16, 2017, two big white officers from the state police went to my residence with someone else who spoke a version of Spanish that was strange to me. The trial dragged on for years, but eventually, on January 11, 2022, Judge Janet Kenton Walker denied the defense's motion to suppress the DNA evidence. Ortiz did not plead guilty to the charge of taking a life of the first degree, but in a plea bargain, he pleaded guilty to deprivation of life of the second degree, a charge that carries a shorter sentence. He also pleaded guilty to the robbery charge, which carried a sentence of 20 years in prison. Prosecutors said Marcotte's family agreed to the plea bargain to spare themselves a harsh trial. We are thankful and pleased that the trial ended the way we always wanted it to, that this man will now be in a place where he cannot hurt anyone the way he hurt Vanessa. The Marcotte family said in a statement released by the district attorney's office, "Let's keep this monster off the streets. I'll be dead long before he gets a parole hearing," Vanessa Marcotte's father said. Angelo Colon Ortiz, 36, was sentenced to life in prison in October 2022. He will serve 20 years on the robbery charge and then begin serving a life sentence, which includes a minimum of 25 years before being eligible for parole. That would make it at least 45 years in prison before parole eligibility.